My boyfriend forged my signature to name our son Valentino while I was dying in surgery. I was hemorrhaging on the operating table when Paul decided to steal my only chance at naming a child. 4 years together. One hellish pregnancy. 16 hours of labor that ended with emergency surgery when they discovered a tumor the size of a grapefruit crushing my uterus. "We need to perform a full hysterectomy," the surgeon told Paul. "She might not make it if we don't move fast." Paul's response? "Where do I sign the birth certificate?" While doctors removed my uterus, my only chance at future children, Paul forged my signature and named our son Valentino. The tackiest, most bullying target name imaginable. The one name I'd explicitly forbidden. His parents later swore they witnessed me signing from my hospital bed. I was unconscious, intubated, with my abdomen splayed open 3 floors away. When I woke up missing organs and learned what he'd done, something in me shattered. My brother Zeke had tried to stop him. "Why not wait for Sarah?" Zeke had asked. "She needs to rest." "I'm helping." Helping. While I coded twice on the table, he was helping himself to my parental rights. I dumped him that day. I was still in my arms. He didn't fight it. Disappeared completely. 6 months later, I knew why. Facebook photos. Paul's wedding. His new wife, Ashley, glowing and obviously pregnant. The date meant she was already 3 months along when he married her. I did the math. She got pregnant when I was 4 months along. While I was vomiting blood and he was calling me dramatic. I filed for child support and legally changed my son's name to Daniel. Paul fought the name change but never once asked to see his son. 6 years of nothing. No visits, sporadic payments, just anger that his Valentino was now Daniel. Then Ashley divorced him. Suddenly Paul wanted custody. Claimed I'd alienated him. His lawyer argued the name change proved my spite. My lawyer presented medical records showing I was in surgery when he forged documents, 6 years of 0 visitation requests, and even 2 other children he'd abandoned. But the kill shot came from his own mother. She'd texted Ashley during their divorce, bragging about helping Paul. "We made sure that baby got a proper name, not whatever that girl wanted. Just like we'll make sure yours does." She'd admitted, in writing, to lying about witnessing my signature. The judge didn't just deny custody. He referred the case for criminal prosecution. Paul's parents were charged with perjury. His mother got probation. His father, with priors, got 60 days. Paul got 90 days for forgery and lost his nursing license permanently. Daniel is 13 now. Knows the whole story. Burns every card addressed to Valentino. "My name is Daniel," he says. "Mom chose it while she was choosing to live." Last month, Paul had another son with wife number 3, born February 14th, named him Valentino. But here's what Paul doesn't know. Ashley, wife number 2, called me last week. Her son, Paul's second child, needs a kidney transplant. Rare blood type. She'd tested everyone she could think of. "The only match we found is Daniel," she said, crying. "I know I have no right to ask. You slept with my boyfriend while I was pregnant." "I know. I'm sorry. I'm desperate. My son is dying." I told her I'd think about it. I haven't told Daniel yet. This morning, Paul texted from a number I didn't recognize. "I heard about Ashley's kid. If Daniel donates, I'll sign away all parental rights. Full adoption for your husband. I'll disappear forever." My husband. He doesn't know I remarried. Doesn't know Daniel already calls another man dad. Doesn't know my husband filed adoption papers months ago that Paul's been ignoring. But here's the real kicker. The text continued. "Or I tell Daniel the truth about his real name. I have the original birth certificate. Valentino is still his legal name in the state system. You forged the change documents, not me. I kept copies of everything, including the security footage of you signing while drugged post-surgery. My parents lied about the wrong signature." My phone rings. It's Ashley again. "Please," she's sobbing. "We just found out. If Daniel doesn't donate in the next 72 hours, my son won't make it. Paul says you're thinking about it. Please don't let my baby die because of what we did to you." I look at Daniel doing homework, healthy and happy, unaware his half-brother is dying. Unaware his father is trying to blackmail me. Unaware his name might not be his name. The hospital is calling on the other line. They need an answer. I press the red button to end Ashley's call, and the phone feels like it weighs 20 pounds in my hand. The hospital's number keeps flashing on the screen while Daniel hums some song from his math class, his pencil scratching against paper like everything is normal. My hands won't stop shaking because I have 72 hours to decide if my healthy son donates a kidney to save the half-brother he doesn't know exists, and Paul is threatening to destroy Daniel's identity if I refuse. I answer the hospital's call on the 4th ring, and a woman introduces herself as the transplant coordinator. Her voice is careful and gentle in a way that makes everything feel more real. like she's done this conversation 100 times before. She explains the medical timeline using words I can understand, but wish I didn't have to hear. Daniel is a perfect match for his half-brother. The surgery would be low risk for Daniel, but without it, Ashley's son has maybe a week left, possibly less. They need my consent as Daniel's legal guardian to even begin the evaluation process, which takes time we don't have. I tell the coordinator I need time to think, and she pauses before saying she can give me 48 hours maximum before they have to explore other options that probably don't exist. After I hang up, I grab my keys and walk outside to my car, sitting in the driver's seat in our driveway for 20 minutes trying to figure out how to walk back into my house and pretend everything is normal. The steering wheel is cold under my hands, and I watch Daniel through the living room window, still bent over his homework, and I can't make my legs move to go inside. My husband finds me in the car when he gets home from work, and immediately knows something is wrong by the way I'm just sitting there staring at nothing. I tell him everything in a rushed whisper, the words tumbling out about Ashley's dying son and Paul's blackmail and the hospital's deadline, and I watch his face go through shock, then anger, then the same scared look I saw in the mirror this morning. He gets in the passenger seat and we sit together in the driveway while I explain about the kidney donation and the security footage Paul claims to have and how Daniel is the only match they've found. We agree not to tell Daniel anything yet until we understand what we're actually dealing with, starting with whether Paul's blackmail threat has any legal basis, or if he's just trying to scare me. My husband pulls out his phone right there in the car and calls our lawyer, explaining that we have an emergency and need to meet first thing tomorrow morning. I try to act normal through dinner, but Daniel keeps looking at me weird because I forget to respond when he tells me about his science project. That night I can't sleep, so I get up at midnight and dig out the legal documents from Daniel's name change 6 years ago, spreading them across the kitchen table and studying every page and signature under the bright overhead light. Everything looks right to me, all the stamps and dates and official seals, but I'm not a lawyer, and the fear that Paul might have found some technical problem makes my stomach hurt. At 2 in the morning, I'm on my laptop Googling birth certificate laws and name change procedures, falling down research holes about what happens if original documents were filed wrong or if signatures can be challenged years later. My husband finds me crying over the keyboard and gently closes the laptop, reminding me that's what lawyers are for and that I need to sleep. Morning comes too fast, and I'm exhausted as we sit in our lawyer's office explaining the situation while she listens carefully and takes notes on a yellow legal pad. Her face stays calm and professional in a way that makes me more nervous than if she'd looked obviously worried or surprised by what we're telling her. The lawyer examines all my documents for almost an hour, spreading them across her desk and making several phone calls to the county clerk's office and state records department while we sit there waiting. Finally, she tells us that my name change was completely legal and properly done. All the paperwork was filed correctly and approved by a judge. But Paul's claim about security footage is concerning enough that she wants to look into it further before we can know for sure what we're dealing with. She explains that if Paul really does have footage of me signing documents while drugged after surgery, it could potentially be used to argue I wasn't thinking clearly enough to consent to the name change. It wouldn't make Valentino his legal name again because the original birth certificate was proven to be forged, but it could create enough legal problems to drag Daniel through courts and questions for months while lawyers argue about mental competence and proper procedure. I lean forward in my chair and ask the question that's been eating at me since Paul's text. Can he actually force Daniel to donate? The lawyer sets down her pen and looks at me directly. No court in this country would ever order a minor to undergo surgery for a sibling, she says. The law is very clear that bodily autonomy cannot be compelled, especially for children. Even if Paul had full custody, which he doesn't, he couldn't make Daniel donate against his will. The blackmail isn't about legal force. It's about emotional manipulation and threatening Daniel's sense of identity. Somehow that makes it feel worse, knowing Paul is trying to use my son's name and history as weapons instead of just going through proper channels. We spend another 20 minutes going over options, and the lawyer writes down our action plan. Demand Paul send his supposed evidence before we make any decisions. Consult with a family therapist about how to talk to Daniel if we decide to tell him. Document everything in case this turns into another legal battle. I look at my watch and realize I have 36 hours left on the hospital's timeline, and I'm no closer to knowing what the right choice is. My husband pays the lawyer, and we walk out to the parking lot in silence. The sun is too bright and normal, people going about their regular Thursday afternoon while my world is falling apart. We sit in the car, and my husband turns to me with this look on his face like he just thought of something. We should call Zeke, he says. He was there the day Paul forged the original birth certificate. He might remember details that could help us understand what we're dealing with. I feel stupid for not thinking of it myself because I've been so focused on the legal aspects that I haven't thought about the people who actually witnessed Paul's original betrayal. My husband drives while I pull out my phone and find Zeke's number. My brother answers on the second ring, and I can hear traffic in the background. When I explain what's happening, about Ashley's dying son and Paul's blackmail and the supposed evidence, his rage is immediate and volcanic. I have to hold the phone away from my ear as he starts yelling about Paul being the same manipulative piece of garbage he's always been. He tells me he'll drive up tonight, that he's leaving work right now, that he's going to handle this. It feels validating to hear someone else be as angry as I am, but it doesn't solve my actual problem. I'm trying to calm him down when my phone buzzes with another call. It's Ashley again. I tell Zeke I have to go and promise we'll talk more when he gets here. I stare at Ashley's name on my screen for 3 rings before I answer, because I need to understand what she actually knows about Paul's threat. Her voice is thick with crying and she's confused when I ask if Paul told her about our conversation. She says Paul told her he was handling things with me, working out the details, and she just knows her son is dying, and Daniel is the only hope they've found. She has no idea about the blackmail or the threats about Daniel's name. I feel my anger at Ashley start to shift into something more complicated, because I realize Paul hasn't told her what he's doing. She thinks this is a straightforward medical request between 2 mothers, one desperate and one considering. Her desperation is genuine, and she has no idea Paul is using her dying child as leverage to manipulate me. I don't want to feel sympathy for the woman who slept with my boyfriend while I was pregnant, but I can't help it. I ask her directly about her son's condition, needing to understand what we're actually talking about. Ashley breaks down completely, describing his kidney failure in detail. The first transplant failed within months. The second one got infected and had to be removed. His body keeps rejecting matches that should work. She talks about dialysis 3 times a week, about him missing school and losing weight and being too tired to play with his friends. She describes how he loves terrible puns and makes jokes to try to cheer her up when she's crying. How he wants to be a video game designer when he grows up. How he asked her last week if he was going to die and she didn't know what to tell him. I hate that I'm starting to see her son as a real person instead of an abstract problem, a kid with favorite foods and dreams and a mom who loves him. After we hang up, I just sit there in the passenger seat while my husband drives us home. I'm thinking about the fact that Ashley's son is innocent in all of this, just like Daniel is innocent. 2 boys who didn't ask to share a father with Paul. One of them is dying while the other one could save him, and Paul has found a way to make even this about his own manipulation and control. My husband reaches over and squeezes my hand, but doesn't say anything because there's nothing to say. We get home around 6 and Daniel is at his friend's house, which I'm grateful for because I can't pretend to be normal right now. I'm making coffee I don't want when I hear a car door slam outside. Zeke must have driven like a crazy person to get here this fast. He comes through the front door without knocking and hugs me so hard I can barely breathe. Then he immediately starts planning how to destroy Paul's life in ways that would definitely be illegal. He's talking about showing up at Paul's house, about posting everything online, about making sure everyone knows what kind of person Paul is. My husband has to physically steer him to the couch and make him calm down enough to be helpful instead of just reactive. I sit down across from Zeke and ask him to tell me everything he remembers about the day Daniel was born, every detail about what Paul said and did. Zeke takes a breath and his face changes as he goes back to that day 13 years ago. He describes Paul acting frantic and scared when I was in surgery, pacing the waiting room and calling people. But the second the doctors came out and said I was going to survive, Paul switched modes completely. He got weirdly focused on paperwork, asking about birth certificates and what needed to be signed. Zeke thought it was just Paul trying to handle practical things while I recovered, being responsible for once in his life. Zeke's face gets darker as he remembers more details, and he tells me about Paul's parents showing up maybe an hour after the doctors said I would live. Paul hugged them both, and the 3 of them disappeared down a hallway together, and Zeke thought they were going to fill out birth certificate paperwork, which seemed normal enough. They were gone for almost 30 minutes, and when they came back, Paul kept repeating the same phrases over and over, stuff like Sarah would want this, and I'm doing what's best for my son, and at the time Zeke figured Paul was just stressed and talking himself through a hard day. But now those words sound different, like Paul was practicing his story, getting his justifications ready before anyone could question what he'd done. Zeke says Paul's mom kept patting his arm and telling him he was being such a good father, making the right choices, and Paul's dad nodded along like they'd all agreed on something important. Then Zeke drops the detail that makes my whole body go cold. He says Paul got a phone call while I was still in surgery, before anyone knew if I would survive, and Paul stepped away to take it in private. When he came back, he was calmer, more focused, and he started talking about making sure everything was set up right and handling the paperwork properly. Zeke thought Paul meant insurance forms or medical documents, but now I'm putting together a different picture. Paul was planning this before I even came out of surgery. This wasn't some panicked decision made in the chaos of a medical emergency. He was setting it up, maybe talking to his parents about how to handle the birth certificate, maybe even researching what he could legally do while I was unconscious. The betrayal shifts from something impulsive to something calculated, and that makes it so much worse. I grab my phone and text our lawyer asking if premeditation matters for the forgery case, if it changes anything legally that Paul planned this in advance. She responds within minutes saying the criminal case is already closed and Paul served his time, but premeditation could definitely be relevant if Paul tries to claim he was acting in good faith, or that it was a mistake made under stress. She asks if I want her to request Paul's phone records from that day, see who he was calling and what he was setting up, and I type yes, without even thinking about what I'll do with that information. My husband is reading over my shoulder and he squeezes my hand because we both know I'm building a case against Paul, even though I'm not sure what case I'm building or why it matters now. I forward the lawyer's response to my phone and I'm about to ask Zeke more questions when I hear footsteps on the stairs. Daniel comes down into the living room and stops when he sees all three of us sitting there with serious faces and phones out. He looks at Zeke first, then at me, and asks why Uncle Zeke is here and why everyone looks like something bad happened. I freeze completely because I haven't figured out how to explain any of this to him yet, haven't practiced what words to use or how much to tell him. My husband jumps in smooth as anything and tells Daniel that Zeke just missed us and drove up for a visit and we're dealing with some boring adult legal stuff that's nothing to worry about. Daniel looks at my husband for a long moment like he's trying to decide if he believes this, and I can see him noticing things. The way we all stopped talking when he walked in, the way my phone is clutched tight in my hand. But he's 13, and he still wants to believe his parents when they say everything is fine, so he shrugs and says okay, and asks if he can order pizza for dinner. I tell him yes, even though my stomach is twisted in knots and I couldn't eat if I tried. Daniel heads back upstairs to his room, and the second he's gone, Zeke starts to say something, but I hold up my hand to stop him. I can see Daniel starting to notice the tension, the way conversations die when he enters a room, the way we're all watching him like we're worried about something. He's smart and observant, and I know I can't keep this from him much longer, but I'm terrified of what learning about Paul's blackmail will do to him. What if he starts questioning his own name, his own identity, wondering if he's really Daniel, or if that's just what I wanted him to be? What if Paul's threats make him feel like his whole life is built on something unstable that could be taken away? I spend the rest of the evening pretending everything is normal, eating pizza I can't taste, watching Daniel do homework, acting like my world isn't falling apart around me. That night after Daniel goes to bed, I sit on my bed with my phone and draft a text to Paul demanding to see his evidence. I type and delete a dozen different versions, trying to find words that don't sound too angry or too desperate or too weak. I can't figure out the right tone, can't decide if I should threaten him or beg him or try to reason with him. My husband finally takes the phone out of my hands and types a simple message that just says, "Send the evidence you claim to have by noon tomorrow, or this conversation is over." He hits send before I can stop him, and I watch the message turn from delivered to read almost instantly. Paul responds within minutes, and I'm not expecting that because part of me thought he was bluffing, making empty threats to scare me into forcing Daniel to donate. Paul sends a video file and a document attachment, and my hands start shaking so badly I can't even tap the screen to open them. My husband takes the phone and opens the files while Zeke and I crowd around him to watch over his shoulder. The video loads, and it's hospital security footage, grainy and time-stamped, showing a hallway outside what I recognize as the recovery area. A nurse wheels someone in a wheelchair into frame, and my breath stops because that someone is me. I'm slumped in the wheelchair, clearly drugged out of my mind, and the nurse is holding papers in front of me and guiding my hand with the pen. The timestamp says 3 hours after Daniel was born, which matches exactly when Paul claimed I signed the birth certificate, and I have absolutely no memory of any of this happening. I watch myself sign something in shaky, barely legible handwriting, while the nurse holds my hand steady, and then the nurse wheels me back out of frame. The video is only 40 seconds long, but it feels like it plays forever. My husband opens the document next, and it's a statement from the nurse in the video, typed up on official hospital letterhead. The nurse says she witnessed me sign the birth certificate, and that I seemed aware and willing despite being on heavy pain medication following surgery. She describes me as coherent enough to understand what I was signing, and notes that I didn't protest or refuse. I feel sick reading this because if it's real, then Paul might not have forged my signature at all. He might have just wheeled me out of recovery while I was too drugged to know my own name, and put papers in front of me and guided my hand to sign away my right to name my own child. That's not forgery in the legal sense, but it's manipulation, taking advantage of someone who couldn't consent, and somehow that feels even worse. Our lawyer calls within an hour of me forwarding her the files, and I can hear the change in her tone immediately, more careful and measured than before. She tells me that if I really did sign while impaired the way the video shows, the name change I did later could potentially be challenged in court. It would be expensive and complicated and could drag on for years, but Paul might have grounds to argue that the original name I signed for should stand. She's not saying I would lose, just that it would be a fight, and I can hear in her voice that she's worried about what this evidence means for our case. She asks if I want to fight this in court, or if I should think about the chance that Paul is telling the truth about me signing those papers, and something cold settles in my chest because I realize I actually don't know what happened. Those hours right after the surgery are completely blank in my memory, just a black hole where time should be. And the thought that I might have signed away my son's name while I was so drugged I couldn't think straight feels almost worse than Paul just forging my signature outright. At least forgery would mean I had no part in it. But if I really held that pen and wrote something while hallucinating from pain medication, then I helped name my baby Valentino, even if I can't remember doing it. The lawyer is watching my face carefully, and I can tell she sees the doubt creeping in, the way I'm second-guessing everything I thought I knew about that day. I leave her office feeling shaky and uncertain in a way I haven't felt since I woke up from surgery 13 years ago and learned what Paul had done. My husband drives us home, and neither of us talks much because what is there to say when the whole foundation of my anger might be built on something I don't actually remember clearly? The first thing I do when I get home is call the hospital where Daniel was born and ask to request my complete medical records from that day, including any papers I might have signed or any notes about me signing legal forms. The woman on the phone is polite and tells me they can process the request, but it will take about a week to pull everything together and send it to me, which makes my stomach drop because I have 72 hours to make a decision about the kidney donation, and 5 of those days are already gone. I explain that it's urgent and ask if there's any way to speed it up, but she says hospital policy requires a full week for medical records requests, and there's nothing she can do to make it faster. I hang up feeling trapped because I need that information to know what really happened, but I won't have it in time to matter for this decision. Zeke comes over that afternoon and I show him the video Paul sent, watching his face turn red as he watches me in that wheelchair, barely able to hold my head up while someone guides my hand across paper. He's immediately furious and starts insisting the video has to be fake or edited somehow, that Paul probably paid someone to doctor the footage or coach that nurse to lie about what happened. Zeke is pacing around my kitchen getting more and more worked up about how we need to hire a video expert to prove it's not real. But my husband interrupts quietly and points out that drugged signing is exactly the kind of thing Paul would do to get what he wants. Not technically illegal if I actually held the pen myself, but completely wrong morally to put papers in front of someone who just had emergency surgery and can barely think straight. The room gets very quiet after my husband says that, because we all know he's right, that manipulating someone while they're drugged is the kind of nasty trick Paul would pull and feel justified about, because technically I signed it myself. I sink down into a chair at the kitchen table and feel my thoughts start spiraling out of control. Because if I really did sign those papers while I was impaired, then I participated in naming my son Valentino, even though I don't remember any of it happening. The name change I did 6 years later might have been me overriding my own drug decision instead of correcting Paul's forgery, which feels completely different somehow. And I don't know what that means for Daniel's identity or for how I should feel about any of this. Did I steal his original name from him? Or did I fix a mistake that Paul forced on me while I couldn't think clearly? My hands are shaking and I'm starting to feel like I can't breathe because everything I thought I knew about that day is falling apart and I don't have solid ground under my feet anymore. My husband kneels down next to my chair and takes my hands in his, looking me straight in the eyes while he talks. He points out that none of this actually changes the real question I'm facing right now, which is whether Daniel should donate a kidney to his half-brother or not. Paul's blackmail is designed to make me feel uncertain and guilty about the past, so I'll do what Paul wants in the present. But Daniel's legal name is Daniel no matter what happened 13 years ago, and that's what actually matters. The signing question is about Paul trying to control me through confusion and doubt, but the kidney question is about a sick child who needs help, and those are two totally separate things even though Paul is trying to tangle them together. I take a few deep breaths and realize my husband is right, that I've been letting Paul control this whole conversation when the real issue is Ashley's son dying, and whether my healthy son should risk surgery to save him. I pick up my phone and call Ashley back, telling her I want to meet her in person tomorrow because I need to see her son with my own eyes and understand who I'm actually making this decision about. Ashley agrees immediately without asking any questions, and gives me the address of the hospital where her son is being treated, her voice breaking with relief that I'm willing to even consider meeting him. After I hang up, Zeke asks if I'm really thinking about letting Daniel donate, and I tell him honestly that I don't know yet, but I can't make this choice without seeing the whole picture and understanding what's actually at stake. That night after dinner, I finally go upstairs and sit on the edge of Daniel's bed while he's reading a book for school. I tell him to put the book down because I need to talk to him about something important, and I watch his face change from relaxed to worried as he picks up on my serious tone. I explain as carefully as I can that he has a half-brother he's never met, a boy from Paul's second marriage who is very sick right now. Daniel's face goes through several expressions really fast, and I can see confusion about why he's never been told about this sibling before, curiosity about what this brother is like, and a flash of hurt that this is the first time he's hearing about having another brother at all. He asks how old his half-brother is and what's wrong with him and why I never mentioned him before. I answer as honestly as I can, telling him that Paul has never been part of his life by choice, and this half-brother is from Paul's marriage to Ashley, the woman who Paul was with right after we broke up. I keep my voice steady and factual even though talking about Ashley and Paul still makes my chest tight with old anger. Daniel processes this quietly for a minute and then starts asking more careful questions about Paul, like whether Paul knows about Daniel and whether Paul ever wanted to meet him. I tell Daniel the truth, that Paul chose not to be in his life, and that was Paul's decision, not Daniel's fault, and that this half-brother exists separately from anything to do with Paul's terrible choices as a father. I don't mention the kidney donation yet because I need to see how Daniel handles just learning about having a sibling first, need to understand how he's processing this information before I add the weight of a dying child who needs his help. Daniel gets very quiet and stares at his hands for a long time, and I can practically see his brain working through what this means about his family and his connection to Paul. Finally, he looks up at me and asks if his half-brother knows about him, if this other boy is aware that Daniel exists. I realize I actually don't know the answer to that question because Ashley and I never discussed what she's told her son about Paul's other children. I tell Daniel I'm not sure, but that I'm going to meet his half-brother tomorrow and learn more about the situation, trying to keep my voice calm and reassuring. Daniel surprises me completely by asking if he can come too, if he can meet this half-brother himself instead of just hearing about him secondhand. I wasn't expecting that at all, and I'm not sure if bringing Daniel to the hospital is the right choice. But I also realize he has a right to meet his own sibling if he wants to, and I can't make this decision without his input anyway. I tell Daniel we can probably arrange that, but we need to talk more about everything tomorrow when I've had time to think, and he nods with this calm acceptance that makes me realize he's growing up faster than I want to admit. I kiss his forehead and leave his room, pulling the door mostly closed behind me, and as I walk down the hallway, I hear his voice pick up in that animated way he talks to his best friend Jake. I pause at the top of the stairs and catch fragments of the conversation, Daniel saying something about having a secret brother he never knew about. And how weird that is, but his tone sounds more interested than upset, like this is a puzzle he's trying to figure out instead of a trauma he's processing. I head downstairs and find my husband cleaning up the kitchen, and when I tell him Daniel wants to meet his half-brother tomorrow, he stops wiping the counter and looks at me with concern. We talk through the logistics quietly, my husband offering to come with us for support, but something tells me this first meeting needs to be just Daniel and me without extra people complicating the dynamic. I barely sleep that night, lying awake running through every possible way this hospital visit could go wrong, imagining Daniel getting attached to a dying child, or feeling pressured to donate or resenting me for putting him in this position. Morning comes too early, and I drag myself downstairs to make coffee, only to find Daniel already dressed in clean jeans and his favorite hoodie, sitting by the front door with his shoes on like he's been waiting for hours. My husband comes down and sees Daniel ready to go, offers again to come along, and I see Daniel watching us carefully to see what I'll decide. I tell my husband thanks, but I think this should be just the two of us. A choice I'm already second-guessing before we even leave the driveway, wondering if I'm making a mistake taking my 13-year-old son to meet his dying half-brother without backup. The drive to the hospital takes 40 minutes on the highway, and Daniel fills every single minute with questions, asking what Lucas looks like and how old he is, and what grade he's in and why his kidneys don't work. I answer everything I can, telling him Lucas is 11 and in 6th grade, and has some kind of genetic kidney disease that Ashley tried to explain to me, but I didn't fully understand, and I admit when I don't know things instead of making up answers. Daniel stares out the window between questions, and I can practically see him building a mental image of this brother, creating a person in his mind from the scraps of information I'm giving him, and I wonder if the real Lucas will match whatever Daniel is imagining. We pull into the hospital parking garage and Daniel gets quiet, his earlier excitement shifting into something more nervous as we walk through the automatic doors into the lobby. Ashley is waiting near the information desk, and the second she sees Daniel, her whole face does this complicated thing, like she's seeing Paul's features in Daniel's face but also seeing me and his expressions, and her eyes get wet before she even says hello. She thanks us for coming in this shaky voice and starts leading us toward the elevators, talking too fast about how Lucas loves video games and terrible puns, and how excited he is to maybe have a visitor today. We ride up to the pediatric floor in silence except for Ashley's nervous chatter, and I watch Daniel's reflection in the elevator doors as he processes where we are and what's about to happen. The pediatric ward is painted in bright colors that feel too cheerful for the situation, with cartoon characters on the walls and a play area in the corner that sits empty. Ashley walks us down a hallway past other rooms where I catch glimpses of sick children and exhausted parents, and then she stops at a door near the end and takes a deep breath before pushing it open. Lucas is so much smaller than I expected. This skinny, pale kid who looks more like 9 than 11, lying in a hospital bed surrounded by machines and tubes and monitors that beep steadily. Ashley goes to his bedside and says his name softly, telling him his brother Daniel came to visit, and Lucas turns his head and looks at Daniel with immediate bright curiosity. He asks if Daniel is really his brother in this hopeful voice, and Ashley says yes, her voice breaking on the word, and I see Daniel's face soften as he looks at this sick kid who shares his DNA. Lucas starts talking right away, asking Daniel what video games he plays and what his favorite subject in the school is, and Daniel moves closer to the bed answering questions about Minecraft and math class. They find common ground fast in their shared love of stupid jokes, Lucas telling a pun about kidney beans that makes Daniel actually laugh. And I watch them start to genuinely like each other in a way that makes my decision so much harder than it already was. They talk about school and friends and video games for 20 minutes, Lucas's energy flagging, but his interest staying bright, and I see them building a real connection that has nothing to do with Paul or me or any of the complicated adult stuff hanging over this situation. A nurse comes in to take Lucas for some tests, and Lucas looks disappointed, making Daniel promise to come back, and Ashley walks us out toward a private waiting room down the hall. She thanks us again, and I can see her physically stopping herself from asking the question that's eating her alive, trying to give me space to make this choice without pressure, even though her son is dying. I ask Ashley directly what Paul told her about our conversation, and she admits he said I was thinking about the donation, but that there were complications with old paperwork, and her face shows she has no idea what that actually means. When I tell her about the blackmail and the threats about Daniel's name, her face goes completely white and she starts crying, saying she didn't know Paul was doing that. Ashley says she would never ask Daniel to donate if it meant hurting him in any way, that she's horrified Paul is using Lucas's illness as leverage against us, and I believe her because her shock and disgust are too real to be faked. She keeps apologizing and saying she thought this was just a straightforward medical request between two mothers, and I realize Paul has been manipulating both of us this whole time, keeping us separate so we couldn't talk and compare stories and figure out his game. Ashley and I were never actually enemies, just two women who got tangled up with the same terrible man at different times. And now our sons are the ones paying the price for Paul's choices while he sits back and tries to control everything from a distance. Ashley is still wiping her eyes when the waiting room door opens and Daniel walks back in, his face serious in a way that makes him look older than 13. He stops in front of me and asks if Lucas needs his kidney, and the directness of the question catches me off guard, because I thought I had more time to figure out how to explain this. I tell him yes, Lucas needs a transplant and Daniel is a match, but there are a lot of complicated things to think about first. Daniel nods slowly and looks at Ashley, then back at me and says he wants to talk to the doctors about what donation actually means, what the risks are, and what happens if he says no. My chest tightens because I'm proud that he's asking the right questions and asserting his right to information, but I'm also scared that my 13-year-old son has to make this kind of choice at all. Ashley makes a small sound and covers her mouth, and I can see her trying not to cry again as she realizes Daniel is actually considering this. I reach for Daniel's hand and tell him that's a smart idea, that we should definitely talk to the doctors together, and Ashley nods quickly and says she'll find the transplant coordinator right away. She leaves the room and Daniel sits down next to me, quiet and thoughtful, and I want to pull him close and protect him from this whole situation, but I know he needs to make his own informed choice. The coordinator arrives 15 minutes later, a woman in scrubs with a calm voice who introduces herself and asks Daniel if he understands why we're all here today. Daniel says yes, his half-brother needs a kidney, and he might be able to help, and the coordinator nods and starts explaining the medical process in simple terms that don't talk down to him. She describes how the surgery would work, how they would remove one of Daniel's kidneys and transplant it into Lucas, and she's very clear about the risks, which include infection, bleeding, and the small chance of complications. Daniel listens without interrupting, his face focused in that way he gets when he's really trying to understand something important. The coordinator explains that recovery would take about 6 weeks, that Daniel would miss some school, that he'd have some pain and need to avoid sports for a while. She tells him that people live completely normal lives with one kidney, that his remaining kidney would adapt and work fine, but that there are always risks with any surgery. Daniel asks if he can still play basketball after he heals, and the coordinator says yes. After full recovery, he can do everything he did before. He asks about long-term effects, and whether having one kidney means he'll have health problems later, and she explains that living kidney donors actually have the same life expectancy as people with 2 kidneys. Ashley sits quietly during all of this, her hands clasped tight in her lap, and I can see her forcing herself not to interrupt or influence Daniel's questions. The coordinator is careful to emphasize that Daniel can change his mind at any point, even on the day of surgery, and that no one will be angry or disappointed if he decides this isn't right for him. She asks Daniel if he has any other questions, and he's quiet for a moment before asking what happens to Lucas if he says no. The coordinator's expression softens, and she admits that without a kidney transplant soon, Lucas will continue to get sicker, and eventually his body will stop working. Daniel's face goes pale and he looks at me, and I can see him starting to understand the weight of what he's being asked to consider. The coordinator thanks Daniel for his thoughtful questions and tells us to take all the time we need to think about this. Then she leaves the room with Ashley following her to ask some additional medical questions. Daniel sits next to me in silence for a long minute, and then asks if we can go somewhere to talk, just the two of us. We walk down to the hospital cafeteria, which is nearly empty in the mid-afternoon, and I buy Daniel a soda and we sit at a table in the corner, away from the few other people scattered around. Daniel takes a long drink and then tells me he likes Lucas, that Lucas seems like a good kid who told funny jokes and he doesn't want Lucas to die. But he's also scared of having surgery, and he doesn't understand why Paul never wanted to know him, but suddenly cares now that there's something Daniel can do for him. I try to explain as gently as I can that Paul isn't a good person, that his sudden interest isn't really about Daniel at all, but about Paul trying to fix a problem while still maintaining control over the situation. I tell Daniel that whatever he decides about donation has to be about Lucas, and about what Daniel himself can live with, not about Paul's threats or manipulation. Daniel asks what will happen if he says no, and I'm honest with him that Lucas will probably die without a transplant, and that Paul will likely try to make trouble about the name change and cause us legal problems. I watch my son's face crumple as he realizes there's no choice that doesn't hurt someone. That saying yes means surgery and risk, but saying no means a kid dies and Paul attacks us anyway. I hate Paul more in that moment than I ever have before, even more than when I woke up from surgery missing organs and learned what he'd done, because now he's put this impossible burden on a 13-year-old child. Daniel starts crying and I pull him close, holding him in the middle of the hospital cafeteria while other families eat lunch and pretend not to notice. He tells me he doesn't want Lucas to die, but he's scared and angry that he has to be the one to save him, and I tell him that's completely fair, and he's allowed to feel all of those things. I tell him being scared doesn't make him weak, and being angry doesn't make him selfish, that these are huge feelings for a huge situation, and anyone would feel the same way. Daniel cries for a few minutes and then pulls back, wiping his face with his sleeve, and asks me what I would do if I were him. I take a breath and tell him honestly that I don't know what the right answer is. I explain that I'm angry at Paul and I have complicated feelings about Ashley, but Lucas is innocent and dying, and sometimes the right choice is the one that lets you sleep at night even if it costs you something. I tell him that I can't make this decision for him because it's his body and his risk, but that I'll support whatever he chooses and protect him from Paul no matter what happens. Daniel is quiet for a long time, staring at his soda can and picking at the tab, and then he says he needs to think about it overnight. I tell him that's completely reasonable and that he should take all the time he needs. We drive home and Daniel is silent in the passenger seat, staring out the window, and I don't try to fill the silence with reassurance or advice because this has to be his choice to make. At home, he goes straight to his room and closes the door, and I resist every urge to follow him and try to influence his decision, because the only thing worse than Daniel having to make this choice would be him making it because of pressure from me. That night, my phone buzzes with a text from Paul's number asking what Daniel decided, and I stare at it for 10 seconds before locking my screen without responding. Paul doesn't get to be part of this conversation anymore, doesn't get to know what's happening until it's already done. Whatever Daniel chooses tomorrow will be because he looked at Lucas dying in that hospital bed and made his own choice about what kind of person he wants to be, not because Paul threatened us or thinks he has leverage over our lives. I put my phone face down on the kitchen counter and go upstairs to check on Daniel, but his light is already off and I can hear his steady breathing through the door. My husband finds me standing in the hallway and pulls me close without saying anything, because there's nothing to say except wait and see what tomorrow brings. I barely sleep, running through every possible outcome and trying to prepare myself for whatever Daniel decides. But when morning comes, I'm still not ready. Daniel appears in the kitchen doorway already dressed, looking more serious than I've ever seen him, and my husband and I both freeze with our coffee cups halfway to our mouths. Zeke comes downstairs behind him, and the four of us stand there in this weird tableau until Daniel takes a breath and says he wants to donate because Lucas seems like a good kid, and he doesn't want to spend the rest of his life knowing he could have saved someone but didn't. He admits he's scared about the surgery and doesn't really understand why Paul never cared about him, but suddenly cares now. But that's not what this is about for him. I watch my 13-year-old son explain his moral reasoning with a clarity that makes me want to cry. and scream at the same time because I've never been more proud of his compassion or more angry that he has to make this choice at all. My husband wraps Daniel in a hug and tells him he's brave, and Zeke has to leave the room because he's crying too hard to hide it. I pull myself together enough to call the hospital and tell the transplant coordinator that Daniel has decided to move forward with the evaluation process. She sounds relieved and pleased, immediately launching into scheduling details and explaining the next steps. They can fit him in for initial testing this afternoon if we can get there by 2, and she reminds me very clearly that Daniel can change his mind at any point in the process, and no one will judge him for it. I repeat this part loudly enough for Daniel to hear from across the room because I need him to know he's not locked into anything yet, that scared or uncertain is allowed. Before we leave for the hospital, I pull out my phone and text Paul that Daniel made his own choice to donate, and Paul's blackmail had nothing to do with it. I tell him he doesn't get to take credit for Daniel's compassion or courage, that this decision belongs entirely to Daniel and has nothing to do with Paul's threats or manipulation. I type that he's never to contact us again after this is over, that whatever happens with the transplant is the last time his name enters our lives. I hit send and then immediately block his number before he can respond, because I don't want to see whatever self-serving garbage he'll try to spin about this. My phone rings 10 minutes later, and it's our lawyer with news that makes me sit down hard on the couch. She's reviewed the security footage Paul sent and consulted with medical experts about the pain medication I was given during and after surgery. They all confirm that signing legal documents while on that level of medication would make those signatures legally questionable at best, potentially invalid at worst. She explains that if Paul tries to challenge the name change, we actually have strong grounds to argue I wasn't mentally competent to consent to anything in those first hours after surgery, which means the original birth certificate signing might be thrown out entirely. The irony hits me like a physical force because Paul's supposed evidence of my drugged signing might actually prove that he manipulated me while I was incapacitated, which would support my case that the name change was necessary to correct his manipulation. I tell our lawyer to prepare a countersuit if Paul makes any legal moves, and she agrees we have a strong position, and that Paul's threats were probably empty bluster from someone who knows he's already lost. That afternoon, Daniel goes through medical testing at the hospital, blood work and scans and physical examinations to confirm he's healthy enough to donate. A psychologist spends over an hour with him in a private room making sure this is genuinely his choice and not pressure from me or anyone else, asking him questions about why he wants to do this and what he understands about the risks. Daniel passes every assessment, and the psychologist tells me afterward that my son has remarkable emotional maturity and a clear understanding of what he's agreeing to, which makes me proud and sad because 13-year-olds shouldn't need that kind of maturity. The next 2 weeks crawl by in a blur of pre-surgery appointments and final testing, and trying to keep Daniel's life as normal as possible while he prepares to have an organ removed. Surgery day arrives, and Daniel is calm in a way that makes me more nervous because I'm falling apart inside while he's cracking jokes with the nurses. Lucas is in the pre-op area down the hall, and Daniel asks if he can see him before they go in. So we walk down together and find Lucas looking small and scared in his hospital bed. The boys do an awkward fist bump, and Lucas thanks Daniel in this quiet voice that breaks my heart, and Daniel just shrugs and says it's what brothers do even though they barely know each other. I spend 6 hours in the surgical waiting room with my husband and Zeke and Ashley, and it's the most surreal experience of my life to be sitting with Paul's ex-wife, hoping both our sons survive their surgeries. Ashley keeps apologizing, and I keep telling her to stop because this isn't about us anymore. It's about Lucas and Daniel and the choice Daniel made on his own. A nurse comes out every hour with updates, and each time my stomach drops until I hear the words going well and no complications. Finally, the transplant surgeon appears and tells us both surgeries went perfectly, that Daniel's kidney is already functioning in Lucas's body, and both boys are in recovery. I practically run to Daniel's room and find him groggy and uncomfortable, hooked up to monitors and IV lines. He opens his eyes when I take his hand, and the first thing he asks is whether Lucas is okay, whether the kidney is working, and I start crying because even in pain, his first thought is for his half-brother. He barely knows. The next few weeks, Daniel recovers faster than the doctors expected, back on his feet within days and complaining about being bored within a week. He starts texting with Lucas regularly, and I watch them build a real relationship that has nothing to do with Paul, just two kids who share DNA and bad jokes and a connection forged through something bigger than either of them. Ashley and I developed this cautious friendship based on our sons being linked now, meeting for coffee while the boys recover, and finding out we actually like each other when we're not defined by Paul. She tells me Paul's third marriage is already falling apart, that his new wife found out about his criminal record and the other kids he abandoned. I feel nothing when I hear this because Paul is irrelevant now, just a man who keeps making the same mistakes while the people he hurt build better lives without him. 3 months after the surgery, both boys are healthy and thriving in ways that still surprise me when I think about how close we came to losing Lucas. Daniel went back to playing soccer within 6 weeks, and his coach says you'd never know he donated a kidney because he's running faster than ever and scoring more goals than last season. Our lawyer called 2 weeks after the surgery to tell me Paul never filed any challenge to the name change, and that after reviewing his supposed evidence with a legal expert, she confirmed it would have actually damaged his case since it proved he manipulated me while I was drugged and incapacitated. Paul got what he wanted. Lucas's life saved, and then he disappeared back into whatever mess his third marriage has become. Ashley texts me photos of Lucas at his follow-up appointments, and the kid looks like a completely different person now. Color in his cheeks and energy in his eyes that wasn't there before. Daniel and Lucas text each other constantly about video games and stupid memes, and they're planning to meet up over summer break for a week at Ashley's place, which feels surreal, but also right somehow. Last week, Daniel was helping me make dinner, and he just casually mentioned that he's glad he donated because Lucas turned out to be actually cool, and they have the same sense of humor. Then he got quiet for a minute and said he knows Paul is his biological father. But his real dad is the man who raised him, the one who taught him to ride a bike and helped with homework and showed up to every soccer game. He said the name Daniel is who he's always been, regardless of what some old hospital paperwork says, and that giving Lucas a kidney taught him something about himself that had nothing to do with Paul or the past. I stood there cutting vegetables and realized my 13-year-old son has made peace with his complicated identity in a way I'm still working toward. That his choice to save Lucas came from a place of genuine compassion rather than obligation or manipulation. We're all moving forward now with these messy and imperfect family connections built on the boys' real relationship rather than Paul's attempts to control everything, and somehow that feels like the best possible outcome from what started as an impossible situation.